You don't really need anything, but somehow you still end up buying something. And for a moment, it actually works, because this isn't really about money. It's about something much quieter that most people don't notice. Why the act of buying can change the way you feel almost instantly. Why it tends to happen at very specific emotional moments, and why, even when people know it doesn't solve anything, they still come back to it. There is a pattern here, and once you see it, you start to understand that what looks like a financial habit is often an emotional strategy. If you're into psychology that actually explains real behavior in a clear and honest way, subscribe, because what you're about to understand is something most people feel, but almost no one knows how to explain. It usually doesn't start with the purchase. It starts earlier, in a place that's harder to define. A long day that didn't go the way you expected, a conversation that left a strange aftertaste, a quiet sense that something is off even if nothing dramatic happened. You open your phone without a clear intention, just to distract yourself for a moment, and then something appears. It's small, accessible, easy to justify, and almost immediately your mind begins to build a narrative around it. You tell yourself it's reasonable, that it's not a big expense, that you've been holding back lately, that maybe this one thing could make the day feel a little lighter. And then, almost without resistance, you buy it. What's interesting is not the object itself, but the shift that follows. There's a subtle change in your internal state. The tension softens, your attention narrows, and for a brief moment, things feel more organized inside your head. It's not dramatic, but it's noticeable. And that's exactly why this behavior repeats, because in that moment, it works. From the outside, this is usually interpreted in a very superficial way. People call it impulsive, emotional, irresponsible, a lack of discipline. But that explanation doesn't hold up when you look closer. Because if it were just about losing control, the experience wouldn't feel so precise, so timed, so consistently linked to emotional states. The behavior is not random. It appears in patterns, often after moments of discomfort, uncertainty, or internal friction. And this is where the first important shift happens. In many cases, spending money to feel better is not really about wanting more things. It's about changing how you feel, quickly and reliably. Research on what is commonly called retail therapy suggests that making a purchase, especially when it involves personal choice, can actually reduce certain negative emotions like sadness. Not because the product itself has any real emotional power, but because the act of choosing restores something that those emotions tend to take away, a sense of control. When someone feels low, overwhelmed, or disconnected, there is often a subtle loss of agency. It feels like things are happening to them, rather than because of them. But the moment they start comparing options, selecting, and deciding, something shifts. They move from passive to active. And, psychologically, that transition matters. Because action creates a sense of direction, even if the situation itself hasn't changed. This is why even small purchases can feel disproportionately effective. It's not about the price or the utility. It's about what the act represents internally, a moment of decision, a moment of control, a moment where the person feels, even briefly, that they are influencing their own state. But this is still just the surface of the behavior. Because if you pay attention to when this pattern shows up, you begin to notice that it rarely happens in neutral moments. It tends to appear after something emotional, something subtle but significant. After feeling rejected, after comparing yourself to someone else, after a quiet sense of not being enough, or not being where you thought you would be. And that's where this stops being just about emotion and starts becoming something much deeper. And this is where the behavior begins to reveal a different function, one that is less visible but far more important. Because in many cases, the purchase is not just regulating how you feel, it's trying to repair how you see yourself. There is a concept in psychology often referred to as self-discrepancy, which describes the gap between who you are right now and who you believe you should be or wish you were. And the uncomfortable truth is that most people carry some version of that gap almost all the time. Not feeling successful enough, attractive enough, disciplined enough, recognized enough. It's subtle, but it accumulates. And when that gap becomes more noticeable after a bad day, a comparison, a failure, or even just a quiet moment of reflection, the mind looks for ways to close it, even temporarily. This is where spending starts to take on a symbolic role, because the object you buy is rarely just an object. It represents something. It can represent competence, status, care, reward, control, progress, identity. And even if you don't consciously think about it this way, your brain registers it. Buying something new can momentarily make you feel more aligned with the version of yourself you want to be. Not because your life actually changed, but because the symbol of that change is now in your hands. And for a brief moment, that's enough. This is why certain types of purchases tend to cluster around certain emotional states. When people feel behind in life, they might spend on things that signal progress or success. When they feel insecure, they might spend on appearance or self-improvement. When they feel emotionally drained, they might spend on comfort or reward. The pattern is not random. It follows the direction of whatever feels lacking internally. The purchase becomes a shortcut, a fast-tracked version of becoming, even if only for a few minutes. Research on compensatory consumption supports this idea. It suggests that when people experience a gap between their current self and their desired self, they are more likely to engage in behaviors that symbolically reduce that gap. And consumption, because it is immediate, accessible, and socially reinforced, becomes one of the easiest ways to do that. It doesn't require long-term effort. It doesn't require uncertainty. It gives instant feedback. You choose, you buy, you receive. And in that sequence, something inside you feels resolved, even if temporarily. But there's another layer to this that makes the behavior even more powerful, and also more complicated. Because not all emotional spending is about identity in terms of achievement or status. Sometimes it's about something much more basic: connection. Studies exploring loneliness and consumer behavior suggest that when people feel socially disconnected, they are more likely to turn to consumption as a way of compensating for unmet emotional needs. Not because objects can replace relationships, but because they can simulate certain aspects of comfort, control, or self-worth that are usually reinforced through human interaction. Think about it. When someone feels unseen, unappreciated, or alone, the act of buying something can create a moment where they feel acknowledged, even if the source is impersonal. The process of choosing something for yourself can feel like self-care. The anticipation of receiving it can create a sense of companionship, even if it's artificial. And again, it works just enough to be repeated. This is where the behavior becomes less about logic and more about reinforcement. Because each time the person feels bad and then buys something and feels slightly better, the brain starts to connect those two events. Not as a conscious belief, but as a learned pattern. Feeling low leads to buy something leads to feel relief. And once that loop begins to form, it doesn't take long for it to become automatic. But here is where things start to get more complex and more important to understand. Because even though this behavior can be effective in the short term, it doesn't always stay contained. And the difference between occasional emotional spending and a pattern that begins to create problems is not always obvious at first. Because what initially feels like a harmless way to cope can slowly become the only way someone knows how to shift their emotional state. But this is where the conversation needs to slow down, because not every case follows the same path. And this is exactly where most explanations get it wrong. Spending money to feel better is not automatically a problem. In many situations, it's a normal, occasional behavior. People reward themselves, mark moments, soften difficult days. There is nothing inherently pathological about that. The same mechanism that makes it effective in the short term, restoring a sense of control, creating movement, shifting attention, can exist without causing harm. The difference is not in the act itself, but in the role it starts to play over time. Because for some people, this remains a small, contained behavior. It appears occasionally, it doesn't create consequences, and it doesn't replace other ways of dealing with emotions. But for others, something more subtle begins to happen. The behavior becomes more frequent, more automatic, and more tied to emotional discomfort. Instead of being one option among many, it starts becoming the default response. And that shift is not always visible from the outside. Research on compulsive buying helps clarify this distinction. It shows that there is a difference between impulsive spending, occasional, situational, often manageable, and compulsive buying, which is more persistent, harder to control, and often linked to emotional distress both before and after the purchase. In these cases, the person is not just choosing to buy, they feel pulled toward it, especially in moments of discomfort, and the act becomes less about enjoyment and more about relief. What makes this pattern particularly complex is that the relief is real, but incomplete. The purchase does change the emotional state, but only temporarily, and when the effect fades, the original feeling often returns, sometimes with an additional layer: guilt, regret, or self-judgment. And now the person is not only dealing with the initial discomfort, but also with the consequences of how they tried to escape it. This is how the cycle begins to reinforce itself. The brain starts to learn a very specific sequence. Discomfort appears. The person seeks a fast way to regulate it. Spending provides that immediate shift. The brain registers the relief. And over time, this pathway becomes more accessible than others. Not because it is the best solution, but because it is the fastest and most familiar. And speed matters more than we think. When someone is emotionally overwhelmed, they are not looking for the most effective long-term strategy. They are looking for something that works now, something that reduces the intensity quickly, without requiring too much effort or uncertainty. And buying something fits perfectly into that requirement. It is immediate, predictable, and socially normalized. It doesn't look like a problem in the moment, which makes it even easier to repeat. But this is also where an important nuance needs to be understood. Not everyone who spends money to feel better is trying to escape something deep or unresolved. Sometimes it is just habit. Sometimes it is learned behavior from the environment. Sometimes it is tied to cultural messages about reward and success. And sometimes it is simply a lack of alternative coping strategies, not a deeper psychological issue. This is why reducing the behavior to a single explanation is misleading. For one person, it may be about restoring control after a stressful day. For another, it may be about compensating for a sense of inadequacy. For someone else, it may be about dealing with loneliness or emotional emptiness. And in some cases, it may not be emotionally driven at all, but simply reinforced by convenience and accessibility. But regardless of the origin, the pattern becomes significant when it starts replacing other ways of dealing with internal states. When the person no longer pauses to process what they are feeling, but instead moves directly into action. When the purchase becomes less of a choice and more of a reflex. And that is the point where the behavior stops being just about money and starts becoming about dependency. Not dependency on the object, but on the process itself. Because at that stage, it's no longer about what you buy, it's about what buying does to you. And when you look at it from that perspective, the behavior starts to make a different kind of sense. Because what people are really doing, in many of these moments, is trying to regulate something internal using something external. They are not chasing products, they are chasing a shift, a quieter mind, a lighter feeling, a brief sense that things are okay again. And the purchase becomes the fastest way they know how to get there. The problem is not that it works. The problem is how it teaches the brain to solve discomfort. Because over time, a silent rule can begin to form. Not as a conscious belief, but as a learned pattern. When something feels off, do something that changes it quickly. Don't sit with it. Don't analyze it. Don't understand it. Just move away from it. And spending becomes one of the most efficient ways to do that. It creates movement, distraction, anticipation, and relief, all in a single sequence. But the original feeling doesn't disappear. It pauses. And when it comes back, it often returns slightly heavier, because now it carries something else with it. The awareness that the solution didn't last. Sometimes the awareness of money spent, sometimes a quiet frustration with oneself. And now the person is dealing with more than they started with. This is why, for some people, the cycle becomes harder to interrupt over time. Not because they lack discipline, but because the behavior has been reinforced in a very specific way. It has become a reliable shortcut, and the brain tends to favor shortcuts, especially under emotional pressure. But here's the part that usually gets overlooked. The behavior itself is not the core issue. It's the role it has taken. Because when spending is occasional, conscious, and not tied to emotional escape, it remains just a behavior. But when it becomes the primary way someone manages discomfort, fills internal gaps, or restores a sense of self, it starts carrying a weight it was never designed to carry. No object can consistently repair identity. No purchase can sustain emotional stability, and no external action can permanently replace internal processing. And yet, the attempt makes sense, because at its core, this behavior is not irrational. It is adaptive in the short term. It is the mind trying to solve a problem using the tools it has available. It just happens to be a tool that works quickly, but not deeply. So the more accurate way to understand this is not to ask, why do people waste money to feel better? But something much more precise. What are they trying to fix in that moment that money seems to solve, even if only for a while? Because when you shift the question, the judgment disappears. And what remains is something much more useful: understanding. Understanding that sometimes the purchase is about control. Sometimes it's about identity. Sometimes it's about comfort. Sometimes it's about distraction. And sometimes it's just the only strategy the person has learned to use. And once you see that clearly, the behavior stops looking random. It starts looking human. If this video put into words something you felt but never fully understood, leave a comment. And if you want more content that explains real behavior without simplifying it into cliches, subscribe to the channel.